You have exactly 3 seconds to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, I'll appear in your dreams tonight. To ask for a donation for that cup of coffee, link below.
Today's journey of military knowledge will take you on a quest to discover how one of the most notorious dictators of all time managed to rise again in a defeated nation or crisis, commanding an army that has struck terror into the hearts of all agents to this day and possibly forever after, until the end of human civilization. Music. But before we can uncover this secret, military knowledge invites you to journey back in history. Before you is a moment of peace signing, where the most powerful men in the world, representing the victorious nation, are seeking to impose an uncompromising punishment on the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany. Specifically for Germany, its military capabilities were restricted to a minimum of only 100,000 infantry, conventional weapons. It had no air force or navy. Its war industry facilities were destroyed, and it had to pay war reparations to the victorious nations. Germany lost 1/3 land, nearly 1/3 of its population, 1/3 nearly 1/3 of its coal mine, 2/5 of its pig iron production, nearly 1 steel production, and nearly 1% of its land area. The burden of the treaty did not fall on the shoulders of the ruling class, but on the backs of the laborers who set foot on this nation's territory. It is not difficult to find groups of people murmuring the words considered to be the notes of today's Duqiang newspaper. In a glasshouse in Say, a shameful treaty was signed, never forgiven. It was here, in the glorious year, that the German nation was born in all its glory. Today, Germany's honor has been brought down, never to be forgiven. There will be revenge for the humiliation of 1919. Germany, then known by another name, the Republic of Germany, is facing serious problems: ruin, widespread famine, wounded soldiers, and disabled people throughout the streets. Frederick Herbert, the President of the Republic, also this, he believed that a moderate leadership would be the remedy to help the nation overcome the crisis. However, extremist organizations viewed Herbert as an enemy. The reason was that he worked with the old elite in the military and bureaucracy to establish. Other extremists accused him of betraying the labor movement, despite his efforts to suppress rebellions and overcome. The Republic's economy at that time was in great difficulty and also had to repay debts to the victorious countries of the First World War, while the president was still busy with paperwork in his office on a distant street corner. Former soldier of the German Imperial Army seemed eager to post a status update, expressing his outrage on his personal page. There was no way an empire could be defeated, even its soldiers were still present on enemy territory. His full name was Hitler. The main character in today's video, like any extremist, seemed to deliberately ignore the fact that his army was exhausted of all its However, the past cannot be undone. The future is what needs to be focused on. After leaving the army and experiencing many upheavals, he joined the German Workers' Party in 1928. Hitler and his, with the help of former German imperialist figure Erhard, launched a coup d'état. However, this failed. Hitler was arrested and imprisoned for 9 months, but in reality, he was released after less than a imprisoned in 1929, taking advantage of the global economic crisis and widespread poverty in Germany. Hitler, with his Nazi regime, rise to the highest power and officially become a dictator in the after the federal elections on January 30, the Nazi Party became the largest political party in the world. In 1933, Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany, the Republican government. And clearly everything would have ended there if he had just sat there, enjoying his position, and seeking to enrich himself through bribery and speculation. However, he had greater ambitions. He wanted to build the greatest empire of the German nation, and to realize that ambition, building a powerful army, would be the first prerequisite. But if he adhered to the limitations of the Treaty of P5, Germany could at most only build an army capable of defense or attack small countries or wage local wars with major powers. Therefore, he needed to abandon this damn Treaty of P5. But everything had to be done extremely skillfully, avoiding angering the US and Britain. One was a newly emerging superpower. The other an old but still very powerful empire with a vast colonial system. At the conference in June-July 1932, everything took place peacefully. In the matter of abolishing military restriction, the reparations amounted to only €3 billion, payable years after a 3-year suspension. At the Geneva Conference on Disarmament in October 1933, under British pressure, the conference adopted a decision recognizing Germany's equal right to armament as other nations. However, this required checks and balances. Desire for immediate equality was not met. And on 19th, Germany left the conference. 3 days later, on June 18, 1935, Britain signed a naval treaty allowing Germany to build a fleet of surface ships and submarines. This treaty directly violated the VSA and further strengthened Germany's position on the international stage. Thus, the barriers imposed by the VSA on Germany's defense capabilities were systematically dismantled. From this event to the subsequent decisions to sign non-aggression pacts with other countries regarding territorial claims with Western countries, we can see that in foreign affairs alone, the Nazi regime far surpassed the German Empire under Emperor Wilhelm II. Thanks to this, Germany had conditions to dominate the battlefield instead of being crushed from within. Let's review the essential elements for building an effective, powerful, and comprehensive army capable of forcing any enemy to the first and most overlooked element when talking about a national army is a strong rear base. This is because if Germany launched a war, it would be surrounded by potential adversaries and would obviously not be able to rely on any external, not even if Germany wanted to maintain its fighting capacity. It obviously had to build a strong domestic economy and advance production. Fortunately for the German dictatorship, it had a robust factory system. The industrial infrastructure from the German Empire was preserved after World War, and the government hadn't yet cleared the land to build an airport on it. Hitler, who came from a commoner background and lacking formal education in economics or politics, reckoned through personal experience that the nation could not rely on those who sat in closed rooms spouting empty theories, talking a lot, doing little, and even being delusional about power. Instead, this dictator believed that only those who had experienced and worked directly could perform tasks most effectively, and practically, he craved to exploit all available potential as much as possible. And in the empire being built, there would be no one who worked little and reaped much. Not even those with congenital disabilities or those who could obtain a mental health certificate. Hitler bluntly declared, "What we want is to re-educate the German people by forcing everyone to work as a duty. Every German citizen, rich or poor, from an intellectual family or a working class background, will be treated with respect. A leader would have to participate in manual labor at least once in their life to learn better command skills. Having already learned how to issue orders, Hitler proposed compulsory labor for male citizens, comprehensive agricultural reform, reduced interest rates, and loosened trade union regulations to boost industrial growth and create new road and waterway construction. Hitler's reforms differed significantly from those of other countries, emphasizing his absolute power and forcing citizens to obey his absolute orders without sympathy. Trade unions were considered enemies of recovery, and aid was targeted at those Hitler considered true citizens of Germany. However, in terms of results, German industry at this time escaped the crisis. Combined with a system of commodity distribution, this gradually shifted the economy to a wartime mode. Furthermore, after annexing territories from other countries with strong industrial bases, Germany's wartime industry became even more powerful, ready to supply the front lines with vehicles, weapons, and ammunition. A huge number of talented scientists and engineers were recruited to develop new, more modern weapons to give soldiers an advantage on the battlefield. Support for Hitler within the German population was also strengthened. So, the economic problem was temporarily solved. Now came the second problem: how to get soldiers from a country that had just suffered a humiliating defeat to be ready to fight even when facing endless lines of resistance fighters. Clearly, with the culture and general level of the German people at that time, Hitler could not force the people to send their husbands and sons to fight fanatically based on belief in some supernatural deity, like the Japanese fascists or the Holy Knights he chose. Expressed in his own autobiography, in which this dictator completely posits that all people are born equal or any, but rather that levels of power are determined by intelligence, strength, and the desire to dominate the universe. This difference is not limited to individual people, but is a generalization of the characteristics of each ethnic group. Based on certain characteristics of these groups, I would like to quote some of Hitler's catchphrases, heavily laden with nationalistic prejudice and stereotypes. For example, Indian nationalists often surprise me because they babble theories about maritime activities without any real ability. Or I am disgusted by the sight of the mixed race people swarming in the capital like Czechoslovakia, etc. I am disgusted by the Thai wind, persistent parasite of humanity, seen everywhere. In his book, he also asserted that the Argentinians are linked to human civilization and that their extinction or decline would plunge the earth back into the darkness of an uncivilized era. Besides using anti-Iranian ideology to incite nationalist sentiment to an extreme level, Hitler established the Hitler Youth, a group of obedient and submissive teenagers who were trained, including brainwashing, to become future soldiers. He understood that children are easily influenced. Loneliness is easily turned into a tool to keep these young people busy in organizations to dispel their feelings of loneliness. When someone objected, saying, "I will not stand with you," Hitler calmly replied, "Your children belong to us. Your next generation is on our side. Before long, they will know nothing but this new way of thinking about the cause of the country's disastrous situation." He blamed the Jews and simultaneously imposed an extremist, blind nationalist ideology to current future soldiers and officers with the reactionary view that they must carry out the mission of conquering territory, seizing space for the nation's survival, for what the dictator called the next step of human civilization. On that dark path, Germany would either be a world power or nothing at all. Ham music. So, the economic and nationalistic issues were basically resolved. But in a war, the fighting spirit of new soldiers and officers were the direct factor in achieving victory and creating a true Third Reich. Hitler needed to re-establish the largest possible military force, and this army had to be highly volunteer, at least reaching a level comparable to the German Empire before the Fourth International. Therefore, immediately after the overthrow of the Weimar Republic, 1935, he promulgated a law on compulsory military service and established 36 divisions, while France only had 30 divisions. The law of land conscription system, applied since the Prussian Empire, was also reinstated. 1935. All Germans were subject to military service. Under the new law, those over 35 and battle-hardened soldiers would be trained and given the opportunity to pass on their combat experience to new recruits who had never been on the front lines. Due to Germany's unique geographical conditions and potential, officers and soldiers at all levels had to prioritize an offensive spirit, because the attacker would have the right to choose their position and fighting method. Even low-ranking non-commissioned officers had to be imbued with this ideology and possess a decisive demeanor, not overly dependent on superiors, capable of making quick decisions, and avoiding missing any opportunities for victory on the battlefield. High-ranking officers had to be closely connected with the infantry, understand battlefield situation, and be ready to sacrifice themselves if necessary. With strict selection and training requirements, priority was given to those who had spent time in actual battlefield situation. High-ranking German leaders could quickly promote potential candidates or replace high-ranking officers whenever necessary. When World War broke out, a German infantry squad of 10 men had a squad leader, equipped with 6K98 rifle, MG42 machine gunner. Later on, the role of multi-purpose machine guns became increasingly important in a medium-level attack. They would have machine gunners playing a leading role in the attack. The remaining machine gunners and snipers would provide fire support, while the riflemen and submachine gunners would move as quickly as possible to occupy positions around the enemy as ordered by their commander, narrowing the attack range. When the soldiers were close to the enemy, the commander would order grenade throwing and a concentrated attack on a single point. When facing a larger enemy force, the machine guns would act as the central point for coordinated defensive positions. Clearly, the careful selection of personnel from low to high rank, capable of executing extremely complex tactical requirements, created a significant advantage for the German army in successive battles against its opponents. However, that would not be enough if we did not mention an overall force that has been associated with the name of the mighty Nazi German army, Black Friday II, who once declared that our wars must be short and easy because we do not have the capacity to wage a protracted struggle. A war of such magnitude would lower our admirable standards of discipline, reduce our national population, and our resources. This was also the foundation of Germany's consistent strategy from Prussia to the time when Nazi Germany was planning a war to redistribute the world. As mentioned before, the German industrial recovery allowed for the complete mechanization of the army, with many modern vehicles, aircraft, and weapons. This enabled Germany to conduct a mobile war with full mechanized power in a short, giving the enemy no time to react. In this one, bombers and infantry would attack the entire enemy front line, but only concentrate their attacks heavily on certain points, leaving the rest as diversions or harassing positions. After the concentrated attack points showed signs of being breached, armored infantry units positioned on a narrow front would move rapidly through the enemy's weak points and then launch an attack. Deep penetration simultaneously opened the way for artillery and infantry to advance, partially depleting the enemy's forces. The main attack point would require the immediate establishment of new defensive lines to hold both flanks, preventing the enemy from re-establishing their defensive positions. By this point, the enemy, completely shocked by the numerous breached defensive points and could not determine which positions needed reinforcement. Finally, armored and infantry forces would launch a highly isolated and attrition attack, gradually wearing down each enemy unit. The Air Force would also provide support, penetrating deep into the front lines until the enemy was completely defeated. In the early stages of the war, believed highly effective, causing Poland, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France to fall one after another before the rapid advance of the Barbarossa was launched. The Soviet Red Army, from the beginning of the war, suffered a series of defeats with casualties reaching several million. The Soviet Union was pushed to the brink of collapse. However, it seems that the dictator, or rather, the Nazi leader Hitler, had forgotten that the Soviet Union was a colossal country, with super-industrial complexes and inexhaustible resources capable of supplying factories with any raw materials needed. Furthermore, the Soviet Union possessed vast territories large enough to allow over 3 million troops to advance like salt in a sieve. Moreover, the Soviet army was not only numerous but also possessed a courageous fighting spirit, along with strong defenses around key position, keeping the German army at a distance. It was only at this point that the weaknesses of the Soviet Union became apparent, preventing Germany from meeting the manpower and material needs of its enormous army, which was too far from the center of the war zone for too long. The country consequently became, leading to the complete collapse of the Nazi regime. This was perhaps not due to any weakness in the German army, but rather the arrogance and delusion of the Nazis in their ambition to conquer the entire world. While overall potential of the nation, the budget was too narrow. But ultimately, the success blitzkrieg in the early stages of war, like the way Hitler brainwashed the people to build such a powerful army, is still worth studying, because clearly, none of us in modern political and military circles want such an army right on our country's doorstep in the future. So, our journey today has come. If you have any contributions, please let us know in the comments. And now, goodbye. Have a great day. And music.